Late summer 1281 off northern Kyushu, the anchorage was crowded with masts, and the sky had begun to darken a heavy rim of cloud rolling in from the open sea, while thousands of sailors waited for the signal to land. The hinge was simple. A storm arrived before the Mongol-led armada could strike in force, and a breach in timing became a collapse in the plan. The plan itself fit in one line. Two fleets, one from Korea, one from China, would combine and deliver a mass landing near Hakata, break through the new stone defenses, and roll inland before Japan could assemble a large field army. A typhoon is a tropical cyclone in the northwest Pacific. It brings violent wind, steep waves, and sudden shifts of direction. By the time the pressure fell, the invasion stood on a knife edge of timing. The Eastern Route fleet from Korea had already probed the coast and found a long wall of stone, the Genko defensive line running along Hakata Bay. Night raids from Japanese boats had stung their pickets, which meant commanders pulled the main body back to safer water and waited for the larger Southern Route fleet. That second armada arrived and swelled the anchorage until ships crowded each other bow to stern. Sources differ on exact totals, but a rounded scale is clear. Several thousand vessels, on the order of 4,000, pressed into the bays and channels west of Hakata. The fleet carried a mixed force, Mongol, Chinese, Korean, each with its own officers, languages, and ways of fighting. Coordination across that mix was a constraint even in calm weather. Another constraint was logistics. Fresh water, rice, fodder, and firewood ran down faster at anchor than at sea because men cooked more and waste piled up, and supply boats had to shuttle from distant depots under threat of coastal attack. The season added pressure. Late summer meant typhoon tracks arced toward Kyushu, and every extra day inshore raised the odds that weather, not the wall, would decide the fight. There were alternatives. The commanders could rush an immediate assault before all units were in place, accepting higher losses at the wall, but keeping the timetable tight. Or they could pull the fleet to deeper water to ride out unstable weather, which reduced danger from reefs and anchors, but lengthened the shuttle to shore and risked losing the chance for a sudden blow. Both choices had costs the commanders could see. Because the landing required hundreds of lighter craft, the decision shifted hour by hour with the wind. Next, the storm warnings sharpened. Barometers were not part of 13th century practice, but the sea spoke loudly. Long swells under a confused chop, gusts that came and went, and a heavy sky that ate the horizon. Boats at anchor began to sheer. Ropes groaned. Officers argued for moving the fleet, but tight anchorages and the number of hulls meant maneuvering would take hours, not minutes. The first band of the Typhoon reached them by night. Rain hammered decks, and crews cut loose rafts and small transports to prevent collisions. Anchors dragged. Ships swung beam onto the seas and then snapped back as cables bit, which meant timbers worked and seams took on water. By morning the wind shifted again, as storms often do, and waves rolled in from a new quarter. The choice to be anchored close to shore now punished the fleet. Reefs, headlands, and the very walls they meant to overrun turned into traps when cables parted. Lighter craft went first. Heavier junks held longer, but began to drag one after another. Japanese boats built for the local waters saw their chance and pressed into the melee under the cover of rain to board crippled ships or set them alight. No single blow decided it. The storm ground the plan down. Timing is a weapon in amphibious war because every element must arrive together. Transports, escorts, landing craft, archers, infantry, horses. The Typhoon tore those threads apart. Units destined for the same beach scattered across miles of water. Signals could not carry through rain and wind. Command fractured when officers could not reach each other, and no one could tell whether the main effort had started or been cancelled. Because the fleet had waited close to Japan, retreat became a messy, ship-by-ship act, not a coordinated withdrawal. Inlets turned into cul-de-sacs, cables fouled. Vessels seeking room to run instead bounced off neighbors and grounded where the gusts drove them. For the defenders, constraints flipped into advantages. The stone wall that had slowed previous skirmishes now protected small garrisons while the sea did their work. Messengers raced along the coast by horse. Monks, fishermen, and samurai alike saw wrecks piling up on familiar shoals which meant local knowledge could be turned into quick strikes against survivors. Over the next day, the storm's core passed, but the sea stayed fierce. Breaking waves pounded stranded ships into timbers. Those that lived were often holed and leaking. Some crews tried to make for open water when the eye gave a lull, only to meet the backside of the storm when the wind backed around. Hours became the measure of failure. A fleet that had planned to land by morning now counted boats by mid-afternoon, then by evening counted oars. In rough terms, the invasion lost not just ships, but the days it would have needed to reconcentrate, repair, and try again. Even 2 or 3 days of storm damage in typhoon season felt like a month because the calendar of safe weather was closing and supplies were already thin. Therefore, the surviving commanders faced a new set of alternatives. They could salvage what they could, pull back to safer bases, and rebuild a landing force, or they could risk another attempt with fractured units in the hope that surprise remained. Neither option fit the facts. Morale had cracked after men watched comrades and horses wash past their hulls. The anchorage was a litter of wreckage, and Japanese boats shadowed any move toward shore. So the fleets disengaged in pieces. In later memory, this storm would be praised as the divine wind, a heaven-sent proof that the islands were protected. It is right to note that memory, and it is right to say our view is simpler. A tropical cyclone hit a crowded fleet at the worst possible moment and turned a large amphibious operation into a salvage effort. Myth gave the storm a name, logistics and weather gave it power. Some chroniclers list numbers of wrecks or casualties that look impossibly high to modern eyes. We can leave the exact totals aside. What matters is sequence and scale. A very large armada, thousands of hulls, spent precious days at anchor, constrained by supply and coordination, and the sea took its opportunity. Japanese defenders did not win a grand set-piece battle. They won a contest of endurance and timing, holding a fortified coast until the storm broke the siege at sea. Because the typhoon destroyed ships and spread survivors along distant coasts, the Mongol-led coalition lost both means and momentum. Rebuilding meant recruiting new crews, cutting new timbers, and persuading commanders to risk the same waters again, all while the season shifted toward autumn and northerly winds. In the immediate outcome, the invasion attempt ended, not with a flag over Hakata, but with drifting wreckage and a withdrawal. In the long echo, the failure reinforced Japan's coastal defenses, hardened confidence in the island's safety, and reduced appetite in the Yuan court for yet another massive gamble across the straits. Weather and logistics had braided together and pulled the plan apart. We should also remember the limits of the time. Ship design favored river and coastal craft. Charts were descriptive rather than precise. Storm prediction was experience, not instruments. Commanders made choices with what they had, and accepted risks they could not measure. This is not a tale of hubris punished by the gods. It is a tale of a narrow sea that turns brutal in late summer and a fleet held close to it for too long. Finally, as the skies cleared, the beaches of Kyushu were lined with smashed hulls and the water ran with torn spars and coiled rope. The wall still stood. The defenders were tired, but intact. The storm had done what their boats and arrows could not do alone. It moved the timetable from imminent landing to forced retreat. The turning point came when wind and wave turned delay into defeat. One distilled takeaway remains. In war, timing is a resource as real as ships and men, and weather can spend it faster than any enemy. If this moment of wind and decision pulled you in, like and subscribe for more from Vanguard Lore.